Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Selling Greenville, your favorite real estate podcast here in Greenville, South Carolina. I'm your host, as always, Stan McCune. I'm a realtor right here in Greenville, and you can find all of my contact information in the show notes, in the show description, if you need to reach out to me for any of your real estate needs here in Greenville or outside of the Greenville-Spartanburg area. And just a reminder, as always, Piper Insurance Group, they are this show's sponsor. They're my go-to for home, auto, and umbrella insurance. They can help you in South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia. So basically this whole little pocket down here. And they're an independent insurance agency, so they can quote multiple different carriers. So you don't just get stuck with one that is not having the rate or the coverage that you need. And additionally, if you're interested in insuring investment properties, they can help you with that too. Commercial properties, fix and flips, ground up new construction, all those good things. So they are also in the show notes, and I would highly, highly recommend you give them a call for a free quote today. And I'd also highly recommend, if you enjoy this show, that you like, rate, subscribe, all of those good things to support the show and make sure you don't miss future episodes. Okay, today we're going to be comparing Greenville, South Carolina, to a bunch of other markets that are kind of considered the markets that compete with Greenville. Markets such as, well, we're gonna do Greenville, we're gonna do Spartanburg, and then we're gonna do Columbia, Charleston, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, Los Angeles, Houston. Sorry if you hear my dog barking in the background. I don't know why she's barking. Houston, Texas, Chicago, Illinois, and that'll be it. So we're going to compare Greenville, Spartanburg to the local area that we're in and the markets around here, South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and then also just to compare to some of the markets that are moving to Greenville, which are some of the ones I just mentioned: LA, Houston, Chicago. Those are some big markets moving to Greenville, at least in my experience. We're going to be comparing to those markets as well, in case you're one of those that might be interested in moving from one of those areas. So I've got some really great statistical reporting here, and I'm going to share it on my screen. If you're looking on YouTube, you will get a great opportunity to see this data, and I highly recommend that. If you have the opportunity to put the pause on this, you're listening to the audio, and pull it up on YouTube, I do recommend that you do that, because I'm not going to be going over all the data, but there's a lot of great data from the National Association of Home Builders on all of these different markets, and I'm just going to go through this. Now, I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'm going to go through some of it. So we're just going to start. I'm going to go in more detail with these first couple. I'm not going to do the full detail on all of these. I just want to focus on some high points. But again, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get to really look at this in more detail if you want. Okay, so for starters, I'm just going to read the top line off of this, which has kind of the high points. Okay, population. This is for the Greenville, Anderson, Greer, South Carolina markets. Okay, population 979.6 thousand. That's a 2.3 thousand increase from a year ago. That's a population for this greater Greenville area. Median household income 69,413. Okay, if you're making less than that, you're a little bit less than the median household. If you're making more than that, great, you're making a little bit more. That was up year on year, 5.7%. Existing single family median home price 336.2 thousand. Okay, slight increase year on year for the median home price for that general area. Total permits year to date. This is something we're not going to get in a whole lot of detail on with this. But if you're interested, builder permits are up 15.3% year on year, up to 8,911. And the unemployment rate, 4.5% as of the time that I pulled this data. That was also a 1.61% increase over last year. Okay, so those are the high points for the Greenville market. We'll look at Spartanburg here in a second, but I just want to point out a few things here with regard to Greenville specifically. First off, we have out of this entire sample set, out of all of the different things that we're going to be looking at, Greenville has the second highest home ownership rate of any of these markets. Okay, so the home ownership rate which I'm trying to find it on here. Uh, Here we go. The home ownership rate, it's funny when you're doing a podcast and you're recording this and you can't do a whole lot of editing, your brain freezes up. My brain just froze up. The home ownership rate, 70.6% for the Greenville Anderson Greer market. So 70.6% of people that live in this market are homeowners. That's great. That's really fantastic. 61% are single family detached homeowners, so your standard house. And then the remainder is people that are in duplexes, other multifamily townhomes, things of that nature. So Greenville has the second highest homeownership rate of all of the markets that we're going to look at in this group. And that's because people don't come here to rent. They come here to own, okay? And that's something, obviously, that I'm passionate about as a realtor. Now, renters have a huge burden, okay? There's a section here that's housing cost burden, and renters in this metro area, it's basically, so you can add up the renter burden being over 30% of their income. There's also renter burden over 50% of their income going towards their rent. For those over 30%, that makes up 47% of the renter market here in Greenville. Of those that their burden is over 50% of their income, that's 23%. So in total, 70% of renters are paying over 30% of their income towards rent. That's not great. In comparison to homeowners, that same number would compare to only 22% of homeowners are paying 30% or more of their income towards their mortgage payment. And only of that group, only 7% is paying over 50%. So that's a far cry from the 70% total for renters and 23% for those that are paying over 50% of their income towards renting. And that's not because there's this huge discrepancy between what it costs to buy versus what it costs to rent. There used to be a big discrepancy. That gap has narrowed. But what's different now is it's just so challenging. You have to have money to be a homeowner right now. And it's a challenge. Like, that's just the reality of the situation. So a lot of people are forced to rent when they don't want to. And here's one of the reasons why. If you look at the age demographics, Greenville is very young. Now, there's a little bit of a barbell thing that you see going on here because we've got less than 25. Well, that's a huge group of people, right? That's people that are less than 25 years old. That's a large group. And then you've got on the other side 65 and older. That's also a large group. That goes into infinity. Obviously, there's not a whole lot of people over 100 years old, but those are always going to be the largest, or I shouldn't say always, but usually going to be the largest two groups. And then we break it down in here from 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and 55 to 64. Okay, that's the age demographics. How does it all shake out? Again, not going to get too much in the weeds here, but 45% of the population in this Greenville-Anderson Greer area is 34 or less years old. That's huge. Almost half of the Greenville population is 34 or younger. Okay, and then between 35 and 64, that only comes out to what, 38%. 65 and older, 18%. So Greenville's very young, 45% of the population, 34 or younger. In terms of the economy, if you're looking at the economy, non-farm employment kind of hit a little bit of a sag, but it is trending in the right direction. Unemployment rate had been going up quite a bit the past year, but it has kind of plateaued a little bit. Inflation, if you're looking at the CPI data, inflation not doing super great. It did bottom out, but it's starting to go back up again. So obviously that's something to keep track of. But the state GDP, there's no negatives, right? This state GDP goes all the way back to fourth quarter of 2020, and it's just all positives. You see a huge number for the third quarter or the second quarter of 2020. That was just all the makeup that happened after COVID and after the lockdowns. So generally speaking, economy doing well. Would be nice if the inflation wasn't going up, but that's a national thing. We can't avoid that. Now, all of that being said, Greenville has had one of the sharpest corrections from its high of real estate prices of any of these markets, and you can see that in the median existing single-family home price. It peaked, right? We have a nice crystal clear peak right around the fourth quarter of 2023, and it started to go down. It's come back up a little bit from its most recent low, but it's not yet, and this is not even inflation adjusted. It's not yet come back to that peak. So this is what we've been talking about when we go over the market stats. We've been talking about how Greenville has 5 straight months of the median price point being down year on year. And that's being reflected in this data where we can see that it is not, and again, the way the Association of Home Builders pulls the data, it's never going to match exactly what the Greater Greenville Association of Realtors data is. But this is basically confirming what we already knew, basically. All right. Let's close that one out. And I'm going to drag from one monitor to the next and pull it up for all of y'all on the YouTube. There we go. Spartanburg. All right. This is going to be the last one that I read all of the top line data on, but I just want you guys to be able to compare it. Population for Spartanburg, South Carolina, 384.9 thousand. Median household income, obviously that's about a third of Greenville, right? That population. Not surprising. Spartanburg is not as populous as Greenville, Greer, and Anderson. It's just not never going to be that. Median household income, and just to clarify, this is the 2023 inflation adjusted dollars. So I guess we didn't have 2024 just yet when I pulled this data. But it's substantially lower than Greenville, 61,196. That is a 6% increase year on year, but still a lot lower than Greenville. Median home price, 295.1 thousand, also significantly lower than Greenville. So that's good. If you're a home buyer, that's a helpful thing for you. Total permits, they were up 9.5% year on year, so not as dramatic as Greenville. 3,186 building permits. Unemployment rate, however, is higher, 4.7%, which is a 1.7% increase year on year. And so some good and some bad when comparing Spartanburg to Greenville, and that's no surprise to me, right? Some people come here and they specifically want to move to Spartanburg. Some people would rather live in Greenville, but Spartanburg's just more affordable, and maybe they can take their Greenville income with them to Spartanburg where they live, and that can make sense for them. But I am never going to be, even though this show is called Selling Greenville, I sell a lot of homes in Spartanburg. I'm never going to be one of these agents that tells you that Spartanburg is worse than Greenville. It's just different, right? There are some things that I prefer in Greenville over Spartanburg, and vice versa. So it's just a different thing depending on what you're interested in. All right, so in terms of the rest of this data here, Spartanburg has, out of everything that we're looking at, the highest homeownership rate out of all these markets. 72.4% homeownership rate. 63% of those are people that live in single-family, detached homes, your standard houses. So that's great. Spartanburg, people are not wanting to rent, not having to rent. They are able to buy, and that's great. That being said, economically, not quite as good as Greenville, right? You can see the unemployment rate is trending in the right direction. It did peak already, and it's starting to come back down. That being said, non-farm employment is kind of flat for the past several quarters. Inflation, again, the same as before, and state GDP, the same as Greenville as well. So not as strong as Greenville, but also not cratering at the same time. Now, affordability-wise, renters are facing the same issues that they have in Greenville. We've got the exact same number. 70% of renters are finding their financial burden of renting to be at least 30% or more of their income. 22% of that is their burden is over 50%. And just to be clear, it's not 22% of the 70%, it's 22% in total. I'm just lumping 48% and 22%. 48%, the burden's over 30%, 22%, the burden's over 50%. That comes out to 70% total, and then I split out that 22% are really having that burden of having to pay 50% or more of their income towards their rent. Whereas if you're a homeowner, only 22% of homeowners in Spartanburg have a burden of their income going towards cost of living or towards housing of over 30%, and only 6% are paying over 50% of their income towards housing. So that's great. Those are some really good numbers for homeowners. Not great if you're renting. If you're renting in Spartanburg and you don't have a plan in place for home ownership, you might want to start thinking about that, right? Because rents, it's not going to get cheaper, and there's a lot of rumors that next year the market might flip. Right now, it's a renter friendly market, and it might flip next year to a landlord friendly market. If that happens, rents are gonna really take off. So that's something to keep in mind. Spartanburg is also extremely young, like Greenville, with 46% of the demographic being under the age of 35. So 46% of people that live in Spartanburg are 34 or younger. Very, very young population. And the rest of the numbers are pretty comparable to Greenville. And as I already said, Spartanburg is a great option for those wanting to live in the upstate for a lower cost than what Greenville provides. And I'm very, very positive and very optimistic about anyone that wants to move to the Spartanburg area. It's just like Greenville's first cousin, right? We share a lot in common. Our downtowns have some similarities. Obviously, no waterfall flowing through Spartanburg, but Spartanburg has some good stuff too. Spartanburg has some very good restaurants, some very good breweries. They've got a baseball team coming there. I think pretty soon, like Greenville. Great high school sports, better than Greenville high school sports in Spartanburg County. So a lot to like there, and like I said, it's just different, and that's just the way it's going to be, and different strokes for different folks, as my dad used to say. Let's look at Columbia, South Carolina. Here are my thoughts on Columbia. Again, I'm not going to read the top line for everything, but in general, Columbia is an affordable market. Okay, median home price $276.2 thousand. Okay, that's very, very affordable compared to what we were just talking about in Greenville and Spartanburg. But the median household income is close to Greenville. It's at 67,189. So that's great, right? Your household income is higher than Spartanburg, just a hair below Greenville, but your median home price is way lower than both. That seems like a no-brainer, right? Housing costs are about 20% lower than Greenville. So why don't we hear more about Columbia? Well, it's a college and government city, and the reality is that that's just not for everyone. But that being said, there is a net migration thing on here that I haven't been talking about with Greenville and Spartanburg. Both are positive on net migration. Okay, so just to be clear, both the markets we just talked about have major in-migration flows happening. We already know that. That's why I didn't really focus on that. But in case you're wondering if Columbia has people moving in or out, Columbia has people moving in. A net migration of 23,000 between 2016 and 2020. I would expect that has continued since 2020 as well. So I think you will be hearing more about Columbia in future years. It has, our only national park in the state of South Carolina, near Columbia, South Carolina. And like I said, college town, government town, a lot of healthcare jobs there as well. And so people that are in those industries or are willing to go into those industries, they can get paid a good amount and live somewhere where it's relatively cheap to live. And so not surprisingly, the homeownership rate is very high. It's the third highest on here. The homeownership rate is 70.1%, so very close to what Greenville and Spartanburg were. And I guess you could ask the question of why is it not higher, right? Because all this data I just threw at you, you would think, okay, it should be like way, way higher because everything is cheap there, incomes are good. And so I would say that even though we have a similar 46% of residents being 34 or younger, exactly the same as what Spartanburg was, a little bit higher than Greenville. A larger portion of these people that are in this age demographic under the age of 35 are going to be students in comparison to some of these other markets. So that's something to keep in mind. As well, Columbia lends itself to a lot of people that are transient, that they don't really plan to live there for forever. It's a starting point for them. Maybe they graduated college, stayed there, got a job, or maybe they were in the military station there. Who knows? But it's not an area in general. Again, my mom's side of the family is from the Columbia area. So I have no ill will towards Columbia. I was just there for a conference a few weeks ago. I had a great time. Enjoyed every moment that I was over there. There's nothing wrong with Columbia. It's just not a place that people tend to live for their entire lives anymore. It used to be that place, but now not quite as much. And I think, it's mostly just because of the unique demographic. You have to either really be cool with the college town atmosphere, really be cool with the government presence that's there and all of that. That's just not for everyone. Now, economically, stagnate a little bit, right? You can look at non-farm employment has plateaued. It hasn't come back to the peak that it had a few quarters ago. Unemployment rate got up to 4.6%, started to come back down. So that's good. And interestingly, building permits were, let's see here. Oh, they were up 7% year on year. So so that's interesting. There was something else that I saw on the building permits that I wanted to point out. Oh yes. The single family, what was interesting is that even though those building permits were up year on year, the single family building permits were down. So they're building tons of multifamily in Columbia right now. And I find that to be extremely interesting as well. That does not bode well for the price of housing for single family in the future. So now if you're thinking about buying in Columbia, I would say now's the time, right? Because they're not building as much this year, or they didn't build as much this past year as they did in 23. And probably that bodes this similarly for the future as well. So keep that in mind. But at the end of the day, I think most people I know who have chosen Columbia over the Greenville-Spartanburg area is just for work reasons. I don't know anyone that goes to Columbia and is like, I'd rather live here than Greenville or Spartanburg or any of the areas in between. They're going there for work, for affordability reasons, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. Okay, I'm not here to trash on any of these areas. I'm simply highlighting differences. All right, moving right along. Ooh, would you like that little vibrato there? Charleston and North Charleston. Okay. Now, if you know anything about Charleston, you know that Charleston has a lot more money flowing through it than the other markets that we've looked at. It's one of, if not the most expensive housing market in South Carolina. And I'll just jump right into the data here. The unemployment rate is low, 4.1%. Even though non-farm employment has plateaued a little bit, but it's still on the upward trajectory, right? So economically, that's interesting. But what catches my eye is the median home price, 460.8 thousand, and it is skyrocketing. Okay, that median price is to the moon, right? This looks like stocks for Nvidia once AI became a thing. The housing prices in Charleston are showing no signs of easing And I find that to be fascinating. It had a little bit of a lull in 22, but then 2023 happened and it just starts going back up again. Um, Now, if you look at the housing cost burden section, living in Charleston is a much more significant financial burden than any of the other South Carolina markets that we're looking at. So, in other words, the other way to think about this is that people are willing to pay more to live in Charleston than they're willing to pay in Greenville, Spartanburg, or Columbia. So, I guess hopefully that makes sense. How does that translate out to the burden for renters? We'll start with them again for their income to be over 30% or over 50%. That number, we've been looking at that number being, I believe it was around 70% for the other markets that we've looked at. In Charleston, North Charleston, 75%. Okay. 48% their renting burden is 30% of their income. 27% is 50% or more of their income. Homeowners, a lot less, but a lot higher than the other markets we just looked at. For homeowners, where 30% of their income is going towards 30% or more is going towards their mortgage, that's 21% of homeowners. 50% or more, that's 9%. So 30% of homeowners in Charleston are paying at least 30% of their income towards their mortgage. Homeownership rate, that being said, is still comparable to Greenville-Spartanburg. It's a little bit lower, 69.5%. So this is the first one in the 60s that we're looking at. So that affordability has impacted things for people, but not too much. Again, people are moving there knowing what they're getting into from the outset. They have to have money. The median household income is 85,165. So yeah, that makes sense, right? That's substantially more than any of these other markets that we've looked at. And of course, Charleston is a beach town, it's a college town too. So most of the people who move down there do so for that beach slash party atmosphere that Charleston has to offer, right? And again, that doesn't work for every single person, right? Is a certain demographic. Retirees obviously love the beach. Kids, younger adults love the beach. Younger adults love the college atmosphere. All of those different things. So it appeals to different people in different ways. But Charleston's fascinating to me, right? Greenville does lose some people to Charleston, but not a lot. Because again, it's just so different. Do you want to live in a more of your classic middle class family sort of environment, or do you want to live in a beach college town, right? And do you want to pay a premium for that? Most people choose Greenville-Spartanburg over Charleston once you break it down in that way. All right, moving on to the next one. We have Atlanta, and hold this up, and then it got really wonky on me here. We got Atlanta, Sandy Springs, and Roswell. I'm going to share this with you guys on YouTube. All right, here we go. Now, Atlanta, on the other hand, looks much healthier in terms of income and median home price and all of this than Charleston, right? The median income is slightly higher, while the median home price is $85,000 lower. So you can make more money in Atlanta than in Charleston, and spend a lot less on housing. So it's 86,505 median household income, and the home purchase price is 375.6 thousand. Both of those numbers substantially larger than Greenville-Spartanburg. So, again, if you want to make more money than you will in Greenville-Spartanburg, obviously Atlanta has a much more robust job market in general. You're going to find a lot more options down there than you will in Greenville, a lot more higher paying options. The existing single family median home price also higher than Greenville-Spartanburg, but proportionally, in contrast to how much higher the income is, I think the income more than offsets the increase in the home price. And of course, compared to Charleston, it's a no-brainer. But I mean, talk about a market that couldn't be more different than Charleston. Atlanta and Charleston are not comparable. Nobody is looking at the Southeast and saying, I want to go to either Atlanta or Charleston. Nobody's doing that. Some people are looking at Atlanta versus Greenville or Charleston versus Spartanburg. We do have that. But nobody's comparing Atlanta to Charleston. Let's just be real. I'm also impressed when I look at this. I look at the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate, 3.6%. Atlanta, that's impressive. Proud of you guys. Our little brother, or they would probably consider themselves their big brother for the Southeast, but I would like to say the little brother to Greenville, right? Not little in terms of population or any of that, but in terms of my own feelings towards it. Okay, that's the only thing that matters. That 3.6 unemployment rate, by the way, is the lowest of any of these markets that we'll be looking at, including the ones we've not yet looked at. So it's a little bit surprising when you factor all that in that 32% of homeowners have a housing cost burden of 30% or over, or 50% or over. 22%, 30% or over, 10%, 50% or over. So 32% of homeowners in the Atlanta market are experiencing this crunch of they're putting a lot of their income, a third of homeowners are putting a huge portion of their income towards their mortgage payment. And renters, similarly, it's let's see here, 83% of renters are at a point where they're putting at least 30% of their income towards renting. So it's surprising to me, right? I don't know exactly what to make of that outside of maybe there's some discrepancies in the data. But despite the fact that income in Atlanta is pretty high in comparison to the cost of housing, people are still finding themselves financially constrained in that market. Atlanta also has, I'll just point out, this is kind of random, a smaller share, despite being comparable in terms of the other statistics, the age statistics, all of that. Where it's not comparable is there's not a whole lot of the 65 and older population in Atlanta in comparison to the other market. Only 14% of the sample size for the demographics here in Atlanta are 65 and older. So I find that to be interesting. If you're 65 or older, you might want to do some research into that. Figure out why are people in my demographic not moving to Atlanta. Interesting. Now, comparing to Greenville-Spartanburg, I do know some people who have chosen Atlanta over Greenville-Spartanburg, and usually it's because they want to be around a more diverse group of people, a more diverse political scene, perhaps. And really the big one is oftentimes they just want to see and experience the perks of a big city, right? Atlanta has every big city perk imaginable. It's not New York City. It doesn't have, all those incredible bodegas everywhere and mass transportation. Atlanta is kind of disgusting, Great place to see rats if you're into that. In the MARTA, as it's called, Metro Atlanta Rail, something or another. But yeah, not a whole lot of people generally choose Atlanta over Greenville, but I have experienced that a little bit. Now the homeownership rate a little bit lower, 67.1%. Again, a little bit surprising given some of these other dynamics that we were talking about. But it's possible that median home price, or sorry, the median household income is really being pushed up by the upper income earners. And so maybe, it's possible that without me digging into the data in a tremendous amount of detail and having to go off of these charts that I have, it's possible that Atlanta just doesn't have the middle class that some of these others do. All right, moving right along here. We have the Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia market. All right. Now, I was actually a little surprised to see that the Charlotte median home price was higher than Atlanta, but the income is lower, but the housing cost burden is lower. So apparently people in Charlotte make larger down payments on their homes than in Atlanta. So how does that break out? Median household income 81,262. Median home price 413.8 thousand. That's a big for Charlotte being only an hour and a half from Greenville. That's a huge jump from Greenville-Spartanburg, and it's really close to Spartan. You know, some parts of Spartanburg are only an hour away from Charlotte. You can live in Spartanburg for $150,000, close to that, less than you can live in Charlotte. Wild. And then, to go back to the housing cost burden, again, 27% of homeowners are putting either 30 or 50% or more towards their mortgage payment. For renters, the number is 73%. Okay, so there's strain in terms of cost of living in Charlotte, but it's higher than Greenville-Spartanburg, not as high as Atlanta though, which is supremely fascinating to me. Again, my only explanation is that people have more cash. Charlotte, they're putting down larger down payments, and that's causing them to not have as much of a monthly burden as people in Atlanta that apparently are putting down small down payments. Now, the homeownership rate is only 65.4%, so that's lower than Atlanta. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's the lowest that we've looked at here up to this point. So homeownership rate, not great. That's where that median home price is being reflected in the data. Now, Charlotte is, I've kind of half-truthed before, Charlotte's tied with Atlanta for the lowest unemployment rate. But you can also see that non-farm employment has been skyrocketing. So, I think Charlotte is, we're going to see the income numbers in Charlotte start to take off. Seems like the economy in Charlotte quite strong right now, quite robust, doing quite well. Charlotte's a banking town, among other things, and so we're seeing, and there's not a whole lot of farming that I'm aware of in this area anyway. So really, to the moon on non-farm employment in the Charlotte metro area. And that being said, as I already mentioned, low home ownership rate. Very interesting to me. Charlotte's also a very transient town. A lot of people that don't stay there for very many years, which is common with just a lot of big cities, right? That's not a lot of people get tired of the big city lifestyle. They start to have kids. They're like, you know what? I don't want to be in this huge city with all this crime and whatnot. And they move to a smaller area. And I'm not suggesting that Charlotte has a bunch of crime. I'm just talking, broadly speaking, what people the process by which they tend to go from a big city to a smaller one. So are there people who choose Charlotte over Greenville-Spartanburg? Despite the good economic numbers, most people that I run into don't prefer Charlotte over Greenville. And I think it's because it's kind of a tweener city, right? It's not a huge city like Atlanta, but it doesn't have the small city benefits of a Greenville or a Spartanburg or even like an Asheville or somewhere like that. And so it's like, what actually is the identity of Charlotte? It's a little bit nebulous. It's not even half the population of Atlanta. So I think that's why, when people are looking at the Southeast, oftentimes their eye is drawn to the Charlotte area. They do some research and they're like, not really where I want to go. Some of those people come to Greenville, some go to Spartanburg, some go to Atlanta, some go Columbia and elsewhere. All right, moving right along. We're going to go to Asheville, North Carolina. Just an hour-ish away from Greenville-Spartanburg. And so we do have some people that prefer Asheville over Greenville. I'll get to that in a second. Asheville, to me, is the most disconnected income to home price of any in the Southeast that we're looking at. So the median household income is $67,837, and the median home price $440.6 thousand. That is insane, an insane discrepancy between those two numbers. But that being said, the home ownership rate 69.5%. So it's below the 70% threshold that we've saw in most of the South Carolina markets, but that's still pretty good. That being said, 28% of homeowners have that cost burden, right? At over 30 or over 50%. Renters, 71%. So again, the cost of living, it does hurt. Now, Asheville's unemployment rate seems high, 5.4%. But you can see if you're looking on YouTube, a massive spike. What's that spike? What happened to Asheville? Asheville got wiped out by a hurricane. So had a huge spike up to around 10% unemployment when Hurricane Helene happened. That's come back down to 5.4%. I'm not going to read too much into that. It's going to keep coming down as relief efforts from Helene happen. So is Asheville the right place for you? By the way, I haven't talked much about I haven't talked at all about racial demographics. I'm gonna mention this one thing. Asheville is super white, right? It's a hippie, hipster kind of town. 82% white, and you know it is what it is. That's all I'm gonna say about that. I've intentionally avoided the racial discussion, but that's just an insane number in my opinion. None of the other markets that we're looking at have anything close to an 82% dynamic for any racial demographic. So is Asheville the right place for you? Well, if you want to pay a premium to live in the mountains, it could be, right? Because that's what people are doing. They're paying a huge premium to live in this area as opposed to Greenville, Spartanburg, and the like. And I do like the mountains, by the way. But I personally would, I couldn't see myself living in Asheville specifically. Oh, Greenville too much. Asheville's great for day trips, though. I will say that. Plenty of stuff to do for a good day trip. All right, let's look outside of the Southeast. Let's go to LA real quick. First, this is our first market with negative net migration from 2016 to 2020. People leaving LA. That's not just a Fox News headline. That's actually something that's been happening. And the reason is pretty simple. Housing is just not affordable. And unemployment is high and heading in the wrong direction. So housing, median home price, 1,022,700 thousand. Okay. Massive home price. And the median household income is high, but it not high compared to that. 91,960 is your median household income. So that's an unaffordable market. Unemployment rate heading in the wrong direction. Now, I don't know if the fires out in this area have influenced this number at all, but it's 5.6%, and it's been trending up that way basically since 2022. So I tend to think that the fires have not hurt this. In fact, the fires in some ways, because I think it was mostly damaging to residential areas. I don't know if it will have any impact. It might have a positive impact on unemployment, at least in the short term. You know, as more jobs open up to help out with construction, with different relief efforts and whatnot. Owning and renting both put a huge strain on the people living there. But it's noteworthy that unlike in the Southeast, owning is not that much better than renting in this regard. Okay, so if you're owning, 33% of owners are putting 30% of their income towards housing, towards their mortgage payment. 16% are putting over 50%. So that's 49% total. On the flip side, the renter burden, 56% of renters are putting 30% or more towards their income towards their rent costs. 30% are putting 50% of their income or more towards it. And so all of those numbers are higher, but the gap between renting and owning is a lot lower than the other markets that we're looking at. And of course, owners are probably way wealthier than renters. So really, this is a market where you have to be in love with the area to own, right? Because you're paying such a premium. And that's why it has the lowest homeownership rate, 48.2% homeownership rate, lowest homeownership rate by far of any market that we're looking at today. Very hard to own in LA. Not surprising because it's so disconnected from all of the other fundamentals. All right, we're almost done here. 2 more markets, if you can hang with me here. 2 more markets. Next up, Houston, Pasadena, and the Woodlands. From a sheer income to purchase price standpoint, Houston housing seems, I don't know this market very well, but it seems extremely reasonable, right? Income is 10,000 higher than Greenville, but the median home price is only slightly higher. So the income 79,463 household income, existing single family median home price 345.6 thousand. So both are higher than Greenville, but percent wise, the median household income is way higher than Greenville and Spartanburg. And the median home price is only slightly higher than Greenville, a good bit higher than Spartanburg. So that's something to keep in mind there. But Texas, where what you're not seeing in this data is that Texas gets you with property taxes, school district taxes, and other such things. So the monthly costs are just, even though the median home price cost is not as high as you might think, all of the other costs that are factored in are substantially higher than the Greenville-Spartanburg market. This is why we have a higher cost burden than any of the South Carolina markets. So 23% of homeowners are paying 30% of their income towards their mortgage, 30% or more. 10% are doing 50% or more towards their mortgage. Renters, it's 51% are in the 30% number, 27% are in the 50% number, for a total of 78% of renters are putting at least 30% of their income towards their rent burden. So even though this seems like an affordable market, the housing cost burden is problematic, and I think that's because that number gets baked in some of these other costs that Texas has that South Carolina does not. Now, of interest is that Houston has a huge under 25 population. 35% of Houston is 25 or younger. That's a massive, massive number. I have no idea why. Maybe it's related to immigration. Again, if you are on YouTube, you can see the racial demographic extremely diverse in that way. And so maybe there is just a lot of the younger population coming to Houston for that reason. But the other interesting thing is the 55 to 64 and 65 and older numbers are low. Only 11% of the population is 55 to 64, only 13% 65 and older. Not a place that older people are moving to, is a place that younger people are living. Economic numbers, solid, but the homeownership rate is only 61.4%. So non-farm unemployment has been mostly going up. Unemployment rate 4.5%, but obviously it would be good if that unemployment or if that homeownership rate were higher. And so, I think a lot of people moving to Greenville from Houston are doing so for affordability reasons. And again, affordability not necessarily being that top line, what's the house price comparison, but affordability being all these other things baked in that you have to pay in Texas that you don't have to pay in South Carolina, among other things. Obviously, the weather in Texas is a unique thing, right? Frequently 100 degrees, all that kind of stuff. We don't have that to that extent here in Greenville. All right, now Chicago, last market here. Chicago, Naperville, Elgin, Indiana. I guess Elgin's Indiana. I don't remember. But Chicago's an interesting one because the median income is comparable to LA, right? It's close. It's $87,071. But housing costs are nearly 1/3 the cost of living in LA, and at 379.8 thousand. So yeah. If you're thinking about moving to Chicago or LA, don't just move to Chicago. Okay, I'm joking. There's a lot of other factors besides just that income to home price ratio, but that's a big difference from what we just saw. And so the homeownership rate is way higher than both Houston and Los Angeles, although not as high as the South Carolina markets. 65.9% homeownership rate. Now, I don't know all this going on in Chicago, but you hear headlines about crime rates, you hear headlines about killings. I've heard that some people want to move out due to that. I don't know. I'm not a real estate expert in Chicago, so I'm not going to pontificate. I'm just telling you what I've heard. And of course, you hear things about the weather up there. I think there's no question. Nobody likes the weather in Chicago. You get lake effect, all that kind of stuff. And so the end result of this, net migration is low in Chicago. It's in the negatives. And so people are leaving Chicago despite the fact that housing is affordable in comparison to incomes. So that's very interesting. Chicago's just a unique market. And I think it reflects the economy a little bit. Unemployment rate's high, 5.3%. Non-farm employment has really stagnated in recent quarters. So the economy, Chicago, not doing quite as well as some of these others. And so people are leaving Chicago despite having a pretty affordable housing market, on the surface, at least for a big city. And I'm sure, like Houston, that there's a lot baked into those, into the prices that we're looking at. The homeownership burden is 24% of homeowners are paying 30% or more of their income towards their mortgage, 11% paying 50% or more. Renting, not much better. Although a little bit better in some of the other markets that we looked at. 46% are paying 30% of their income or more, 23%, 50% or more. Um, so, um, as I already said, as with Houston, there's going to be a lot of other costs to factor in all that. You can see that in the fact that the housing cost burden is still quite high, and actually this is higher than the numbers we just looked at for Houston if you're a homeowner, although it's a little bit less for renters. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe Chicago's a little bit more of a better market to rent in than some of these other big markets that we've looked at. But unfortunately, it's just not getting better, right? This is not a market that's becoming more affordable despite all of these crazy numbers. The median house price for Chicago has gone up from below 300,000 in 2020 now up to 300, basically 380,000, and it just looks like it's still skyrocketing. So that's very interesting. Something's gonna have to give, right? Because you can't be completely disconnected from fundamentals like this. And maybe the income will catch up to the home prices going up. But for now, I think they're fine, right? Because as we've already said, that median household income is high in comparison to that 379.8 thousand median home price. But when I've had quite a few clients move to Greenville-Spartanburg from the Chicago area, and usually it's because of weather. Usually it's maybe also politics, things of that nature. There's crime rates. Again, these are the things that I've heard of people that move down here, and it's more affordable as well. So there you have it. I don't want to belabor this. This has already gone longer than I planned for it to go. So thank you guys so much for listening. All of my contact information is in the show notes. So is Piper Insurance Group's contact info. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all those good things to the show. We will talk again next time.